The coffee was the first sign. Jake sat in the terminus mess hall, the last mess hall on Earth, or what was left of it, and watched his cup. It was cheap ceramic, chipped at the rim, filled with the bitter recycled sludge they called coffee. He'd set it down on the grey Formica table, and instead of staying put, it had listed. It tilted slowly, impossibly, to a 45-degree angle. The black liquid inside sloshing but not spilling. Its surface held perfectly parallel to the floor by a law of physics that was suddenly taking a coffee break of its own. Nobody else seemed to notice. The other 100 or so survivors in the room were eating their nutrient paste, their faces slack with the same exhaustion Jake felt in his bones. The exhaustion of being the last embers of a fire that had consumed a world. He looked away from the cup, then back. It was still tilted. A slow, cold dread, colder than the recycled air pumped through the vents, trickled down his spine. That was 3 days ago. Now everything was starting to feel a little bit bent. Jake was a janitor, or as the pre-war titles went, a sanitation and maintenance technician, grade 2. It meant he cleaned the toilets and fixed the pipes in the 7-mile-deep bunker that was humanity's final resting place. Or its final foothold, depending on who you asked. He preferred his work. It was honest, it was real. You scrubbed a floor, it got clean. You patched a pipe, it stopped leaking. Cause and effect. The universe making sense on a small, manageable scale. But the universe wasn't making sense anymore, not since the event. The event was what they called the last-ditch effort. The big one. The moment humanity, with its back not just against the wall but pushed halfway through it, decided to stop playing by the rules. The things outside, the things they called the static, didn't follow the rules either. They weren't creatures of flesh and blood, they were paradoxes. Impossibilities that seeped into reality and erased things. Not destroyed, not blew up, erased. Cities would be there 1 minute, and the next there would be just a smooth, featureless patch of ground, as if a city had never been built there at all. They erased memories too. You'd forget people you'd known your whole life. One day, the bunk across from you would be empty, and you wouldn't feel a thing, because you couldn't remember there was ever anyone sleeping there. They were winning. No, they had won. The terminus was the last pocket of human existence. So, the geniuses, the big domed scientists led by Dr. Aris Thorne, came up with Project Echo. A weapon that wasn't a bomb. A weapon that was a thought. A scream of pure, concentrated belief shouted into the heart of creation. They were going to change a fundamental constant of the universe. Just a tiny, tiny tweak. A cosmic nudge. Enough, they hoped, to make the very fabric of reality hostile to the static, to make it unravel them the way they had unraveled humanity. They'd flipped the switch 3 days ago. The whole bunker had hummed with a power that felt ancient and wrong. The lights had turned a shade of violet Jake had never seen before, and a sound like a billion whispers had filled every head. Then silence. A deep, profound silence that was worse than the noise. The scientists had cheered, their sensors showed the static was gone. Vanished from the surface, a clean sweep. Humanity had won. They'd thrown a punch at God and connected. But now Jake's coffee was floating sideways, and that wasn't all. Yesterday, he'd been cleaning corridor gamma -7, a long tube of dull grey metal. He'd looked down at a rust spot on the floor, a familiar brown stain he'd been meaning to scrub for weeks. He blinked, and the rust spot was blue, a deep, vibrant cobalt blue. He stared at it, his heart doing a slow, heavy drum roll against his ribs. He touched it. It was dry and flaky, just like rust. but it was blue. He'd run to get a cleaning cart, and when he came back, it was brown again. He hadn't told anyone. Who would he tell? And what would he say? "Excuse me, General, but the laws of nature are getting a little tipsy." They'd sent him to the psych ward, and he'd heard whispers about the psych ward lately. People going in and not coming out. Or coming out different. Quieter. Tonight he was fixing a flickering light panel in a storage closet on sub-level 4. It was a simple job, a loose connection. He had his screwdriver out, the panel open. The light inside buzzed and spat, casting long, dancing shadows. In the corner of the closet, stacked high, were old data slates, relics from before the final retreat. One of them had a label on it. L. Miller, grade 4, school project, my family. The name hit him like a physical blow. Lily, his daughter. Erased 6 years ago, along with the entire Denver enclave. He remembered her face, her laugh, the way she'd hold his hand, her small fingers wrapping around just one of his. He remembered the pain of her being gone, a raw, hollow space in his chest. But the memory was thin now, like a photograph left out in the sun. Faded. He found himself struggling to picture the exact color of her eyes. Had they been brown like his, or blue like her mother's? He squeezed his own eyes shut, trying to force the image, trying to hold on to her. A wave of dizziness washed over him. The sound of the buzzing light seemed to get louder, twisting into a high-pitched whine. He heard something else under it, a whisper, a little girl's whisper, right by his ear. "Daddy?" Jake's eyes snapped open. The closet was empty. The only sound was the buzz of the faulty light. But he had heard it. He was sure of it. It wasn't a memory. It was as real as the cold sweat now prickling his neck. He scrambled back, dropping his screwdriver with a clatter that echoed in the small space. He stared into the shadows, his breath catching in his throat. The light panel on the wall flickered violently, then went out, plunging him into total darkness, but for a single horrifying second, before the blackness swallowed everything. The shadows in the corner of the room had shifted. They had coalesced, briefly, into the shape of a small girl no taller than his waist. And then she was gone. The laws of physics had been rewritten. And someone, was using the new rules to play games in the dark. The whispers started small. Jake heard them in the hum of the ventilation systems, a sibilant hiss just beneath the noise of the rushing air. He heard them in the static between comchannel frequencies, faint voices murmuring things he couldn't quite make out. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks, the grief and the stress finally cracking him open. He started sleeping less, walking the long, sterile corridors of the terminus at all hours. His janitor's cart a silent companion. The bunker never slept, but it had rhythms, and Jake's were now completely out of sync. He saw more things, little impossibilities. A mop handle that bent like rubber for a second when he wasn't looking directly at it. A puddle of water that beaded into perfect spheres before splashing flat. A crack in a wall tile that mended itself overnight. He started keeping a small notebook, jotting down the oddities with a stubby pencil. The list grew longer every day. He wasn't the only one. He saw it in the faces of others. A cook in the mess hall staring into a pot of boiling nutrient paste, as if he'd seen a monster in the steam. A technician in engineering bay who dropped a wrench and watched it fall up for half a second before it clattered to the floor. Their eyes would go wide, then they'd glance around, terrified someone else had seen. No one ever spoke of it. It was a shared, silent madness. To acknowledge it would be to admit that their grand victory, their rewriting of reality, had been a catastrophic mistake. And no one was ready to admit that. Hope was the only currency they had left. One night, while cleaning the executive washrooms on the command level, a place of polished chrome and real porcelain toilets, Jake saw Dr. Aris Thorne, the architect of Project Echo. Thorne was standing in front of a mirror, but he wasn't looking at his reflection. He was staring at his hands, turning them over and over. His face, usually a mask of academic confidence, was pale and drawn. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Dr. Thorne," Jake said, his voice quiet. Thorne jumped, spinning around. His eyes were wide, haunted. "What? Who's there?" "Oh, it's you, the cleaner." He visibly tried to pull himself together, straightening his lab coat. "What do you want?" "Just doing my rounds, sir," Jake said, gesturing with a spray bottle. "Is everything all right?" Thorne laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "All right? Yes, everything is perfect. We won, didn't you hear? Humanity is saved. The static is gone." He turned back to the mirror, but his eyes met Jake's in the reflection. "Tell me, Miller, do you believe in ghosts?" The question hung in the sterile air between them. Jake thought of the whisper in the closet, the shadow shaped like his daughter. "I don't know what I believe anymore, sir." Thorne's facade cracked. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the sink, his knuckles white. They promised it would be a clean cut, a surgical strike on one single, solitary, universal law. The one that governed dimensional ingress. Simple, elegant. He shook his head slowly, but it wasn't a scalpel. It was a sledgehammer. We didn't just cut a thread, we shattered the whole damn loom. He looked at Jake, his eyes pleading, desperate for someone to confess to. "Things are coming through the cracks, Miller. Not the static, something else. Echoes, that's what I call them. The universe is trying to heal itself, but the wound is infected. The new physics, they're unstable. They allow for slippage, memories, strong emotions, regrets. They're starting to take on a life of their own. They're pressing against the veil." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Echoes. Like what I heard in the closet. He hadn't meant to say it. The words just fell out. Thorne's head snapped up. "What did you hear?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. "My daughter," Jake whispered, the confession tasting like ash. "She's gone. Erased. 6 years ago. But I heard her. I saw something." Thorne didn't look surprised. He looked terrified. "It's starting. We built this place to keep the monsters out. Now we've locked ourselves in with a whole new kind of them. Monsters of our own making." He pushed past Jake, heading for the door. "Forget you saw me. Forget we had this conversation. There is nothing wrong. Everything is perfect." He left, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving Jake alone with his reflection in the mirror. But for a fleeting moment, the face looking back wasn't his. It was older, more haggard, with eyes that had seen too much. And behind him, reflected in the polished chrome of a towel dispenser, stood the faint, translucent outline of a small girl. She was just watching him. When Jake spun around, there was nothing there. Just the quiet hum of the bunker, and the growing certainty that their victory had cost them their sanity, and maybe their souls. The next day, the first official death since the event was reported. A geologist named Peterson. They said he had a heart attack in his sleep, but Jake, cleaning the corridor outside Peterson's quarters, heard the medics talking. They said his room was freezing cold, covered in a thin layer of frost, even though the heat was on full. And they said that when they found him, all the photographs on his desk, pictures of his wife and kids who'd been lost on the surface, were blank. Just empty white squares in picture frames. The echoes were getting stronger. They weren't just whispering anymore. They were starting to erase things too. A summons came for Jake the following cycle. Not a work order, but a formal request to report to the science division. It was delivered by a grim-faced security officer who eyed Jake like he was a leaky pipe that might burst at any moment. The message was from Dr. Thorne. Jake's stomach tightened. He knew this wasn't about a faulty light or a clogged drain. He walked through the pristine white corridors of the science labs. Here the air felt different, sharper, smelling of ozone and antiseptic. People in lab coats scurried past, their faces tense, none of them making eye contact. The silent madness felt louder here, closer to the surface. He was led to a small, windowless office. Dr. Thorne sat behind a metal desk, cluttered with data slates and printouts, covered in complex equations. The only personal item was a framed photo, turned face down. "Close the door, Mr. Miller," Thorne said without looking up, and made sure it's sealed. Jake did as he was told, the heavy door clicking shut with a heavy finality. Thorne motioned to a hard plastic chair. Jake sat. The scientist looked exhausted, as if he'd aged a decade in the 2 days since their meeting in the washroom. "I shouldn't be talking to you," Thorne began, finally meeting Jake's gaze. "I should be talking to General Maddox. But the general sees what he wants to see, a win. And the military solution to a problem you don't understand is to shoot it. How do you shoot a memory, Miller? How do you put a bullet in a law of physics?" He picked up a stylus and drew a long straight line on a blank data slate. This is reality as it was, a straight line, cause and effect. A to B to C, simple, predictable. The static were from outside the line. They didn't follow it. They could jump from A to C, erasing B as if it never existed. Thorne drew a squiggly, chaotic shape that intersected the straight line. That was them, a cancer. Project Echo, he continued, his voice dropping, was designed to alter the line itself, to introduce a slight, permanent curve. A curve that would be imperceptible to us, living on it, but would make the geometry of our reality fundamentally toxic to the static. We aimed a focused, high-energy psychic field, generated by 1,000 volunteers in deep trance at the Planck scale. The very bottom of everything. We pushed. He pressed the stylus so hard on the slate that it screeched. He didn't draw a gentle curve. He drew a violent, jagged fracture that shattered the straight line into a dozen pieces. "We pushed too hard," he whispered. "We were desperate. We poured every ounce of fear and hope and rage we had left into that single moment. We didn't just bend the line, Miller. We broke it. We shattered causality." Jake stared at the jagged drawing. It looked like a diagram of a nervous breakdown. So the whispers, the things I've seen, the coffee cup. "Side effects," Thorne said, waving a dismissive hand, but his eyes told a different story. "The universe is trying to stitch itself back together, but the needle is bent and the thread is rotten. The new rules are inconsistent. Physics has become a spectrum of probabilities rather than a set of laws. In places where emotions run high, where memory is strong, the veil between what is real and what is felt gets thin. Very thin." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "The apparitions, the echoes as I call them, are psychic residue. Imprints of strong personalities or traumatic events given a brief physical form by the fractured physics. They're like glitches in a corrupted program. Most are harmless. A rust spot changing color, a momentary whisper. Most? Jake asked, his blood running cold. He thought of the frost in the dead geologist's room. Thorne hesitated. He finally reached out and turned the picture frame on his desk upright. It was a photo of a smiling woman with kind eyes. "My wife, Eleanor," he said softly. She was on the science team, a key architect of the project. She was one of the 1,000 volunteers in the psychic amplification chamber. Was? Her mind was at the epicenter of the blast. When we broke reality, a piece of her broke with it, an echo. I see her sometimes in the labs. She walks through the walls. She doesn't speak. She just points. Points at what? Jake asked. At me, Thorne said, his voice cracking. And then at the chamber. The resonance chamber. The heart of Project Echo. The place where we broke the world. He took a shaky breath. But her echo is changing, Miller. The last time I saw her, she wasn't smiling. And the air around her was cold. So very cold. These echoes, they are memories. But what happens when a memory begins to resent being just a memory? What happens when a ghost decides it wants to be real again, and the laws of physics are too weak to say no? The question filled the small office with a dreadful weight. Humanity hadn't just defeated the static. They had created something new. They had filled their last sanctuary with the ghosts of their own past. And those ghosts were learning the new rules much faster than they were. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked, his own fear a knot in his stomach. I am a janitor. Because you are not a scientist or a soldier, Thorne replied, his eyes intense. You don't have a stake in pretending everything is fine. You saw it, you believed it, and Stowe, you saw it, daughter. That makes you part of this, whether you like it or not. The echoes are drawn to people with strong attachments, strong grief. You are a beacon, Miller, just like me. He paused, his expression grim. And I think they're starting to get hungry. The terminus began to feel sick. It wasn't just the glitches in physics anymore, the momentary oddities that people tried their best to ignore. It was a deeper malaise, a wrongness that soaked into the concrete and steel. The air, always tasting stale and metallic, now carried a faint, sweetish odor, like rotting flowers. The lights in the corridor seemed to hum at a lower frequency, a droning note that got under your skin and made your teeth ache. People were changing. The shared unspoken tension was curdling into something worse, paranoia. Durgians would break out in the mess hall over nothing, escalating into screaming matches before both parties would suddenly forget what they were fighting about, left standing in a confused, angry silence. Others became withdrawn, shuffling through their duties with vacant eyes, as if they were listening to a conversation no one else could hear. Memory lapses became common. A man might call his friend by the wrong name, the name of someone who had been erased years ago. He'd catch himself, a look of profound confusion on his face, before shaking his head and moving on. Jake saw it all on his endless rounds. He was the invisible man, the janitor. People didn't notice him, so they didn't hide their strangeness from him. He saw a woman in hydroponics, carefully watering a row of dead, withered plants, humming a lullaby. He saw a tough-as-nails security guard in tears, tracing the pattern of a bulkhead door with his finger, whispering a name over and over. The terminus was no longer a military bunker. It was a sanitarium 7 miles underground. The echoes were getting bolder. They were no longer fleeting whispers or momentary visual stutters. They were becoming tangible. Jake was cleaning a grease trap in the main kitchen when a pot lid on a shelf rattled. He looked up. It rattled again, more violently. Then it lifted 2 inches into the air, spun once, and dropped back down with a loud clang. The 2 cooks working nearby didn't even flinch. They were arguing about the correct ratio of protein to carbohydrate. In the nutrient paste, their faces flushed with irrational anger. Jake backed away slowly, his heart hammering. The echoes were interacting with the world. They were learning to manipulate things. He sought out Thorn again, but the scientist was becoming harder to find. He was rarely in his office. His colleagues said he was spending all his time down in the restricted levels, near the resonance chamber, muttering about stabilizing the wave function. They said it with a mixture of pity and fear. The hero of the terminus was losing his mind. Jake finally cornered him in a service tunnel, checking a power conduit. Thorn looked even worse than before. His hair was unkempt, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had a wild, hunted look about him. "It's getting worse," Jake said, dispensing with any pleasantries. "The whole place is coming apart at the seams." "I know," Thorn snapped, not looking at him. He held a diagnostic tool up to the conduit. The readings on the small screen were a nonsensical scramble of symbols. "The energy fluctuations are increasing. The baseline reality is degrading. We have to tell someone, General Maddox." "And tell him what?" Thorn whirled on him. "That my grand unified theory of victory was a bust. That I've doomed us all to be haunted by our own sad stories. He'd lock me up. He'd lock us both up. He needs the win, Miller. The narrative. Humanity's last stand, the glorious triumph. He can't afford for it to be a lie." "So we do nothing?" "We just wait for the ghosts to take over." Jake's voice rose, echoing in the narrow tunnel. "I am not doing nothing," Thorn hissed, throwing the diagnostic tool against the wall. It didn't shatter. It flattened, pancaking against the concrete, like a ball of clay before peeling off and falling to the floor, a twisted wreck of metal and plastic. Both men stared at it. "I am trying to contain it," Thorn said, his voice now a strained whisper. "The resonance chamber is the epicenter, the source of the infection. The psychic energy we poured into it is still there, resonating, keeping the fracture in reality open. It's a beacon for the echoes. They draw power from it, I think. I think I can dampen it." He ulstered a localized field that reinforces the old laws of physics within the terminus. "You think?" Jake asked, skepticism clear in his tone. "You thought you could beat the static too?" The barb hit its mark. Thorn flinched. "It's the only chance we have," he said, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "But the systems are unstable. The closer I get to the chamber, the worse the interference. My equipment malfunctions in impossible ways. And Eleanor, my wife's echo. She's there, always. She doesn't want me to stop it. She's trying to protect it, to protect the wound." A new kind of fear dawned on Jake. The echoes weren't just random glitches. They had intent. They had purpose. They were defending their new, broken world. "Give me another day," Thorn pleaded. "I am close to a solution, a way to bypass the corrupted systems and initiate a low-level dampening field. Just keep quiet. Don't draw attention to any of it." Jake didn't know what to do. Thorn was clearly unstable. A man chasing his own ghost down a rabbit hole of impossible science. But he was also the only one who understood what was happening. Going to Maddox would be a death sentence for Thorn and would solve nothing. He was trapped between a mad scientist and an ignorant general, in a bunker that was slowly eating itself from the inside out. He agreed to wait. It was a decision he would regret for the rest of his short, strange life. Later that night, the main power grid for sub-levels 5 through 7 failed. Not a blackout. The power didn't go out. According to the frantic reports from engineering, the electricity simply stopped behaving like electricity. It was flowing backwards in some circuits. In others, it had turned into a thick glowing gel that was clogging the conduits. The lower levels of the terminus were plunged into a chaos that physics had no words for. And in the dark, the echoes, the hungry ghosts born from humanity's last, desperate act, began to feast. The ghost of Lily Miller came back. She didn't appear in a dark closet this time. She came to him in the crowded, noisy mess hall during the midday meal shift. Jake was pushing gray nutrient paste around his tray, the strange, sweet smell of the bunker's sickness making it hard to eat. The air was thick with anxiety. The power failure in the lower levels had shut down half the bunker's vital systems, including water recycling and secondary life support. The official story was a cascading generator failure, but everyone knew it was a lie. You could feel the truth in the low hum of the walls, a hum that was now discordant and sickly. Jake looked up from his tray and she was there, standing by the serving line. She wasn't transparent or ghostly. She looked solid, real. A little girl about 7 years old, wearing a simple blue dress he remembered buying for her at a market in Denver, a lifetime ago. Her hair was in 2 neat pigtails. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching a security guard yell at one of the cooks. As Jake watched, a salt shaker on a table near her slid, unpushed, to the edge and fell to the floor. No one noticed. They were all too wrapped up in their own growing dread. Jake's breath caught. His heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. It was her. Every detail was perfect. The small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off a swing. The way she stood with her weight on one foot. It was a memory so vivid, so complete, that it had punched a hole in the frayed fabric of the world and stepped through. He pushed his chair back, his legs trembling. He had to go to her. He had to touch her, to see if she was real. To apologize for not being there when the static came. To tell her he loved her. "Lily," he mouthed, no sound coming out. As if she'd heard his thought, she turned her head and looked directly at him. Her eyes. He remembered them now. They were blue like her mother's, but there was something wrong with them. They were flat, empty, like the beautiful glass eyes of a doll. There was no recognition in them, no life. She smiled at him. It was her smile, the one that used to light up his world. But it didn't reach her eyes. It was a mechanical thing, a mimicry of an expression. A cold wave of revulsion washed over Jake, chilling him to the bone. That wasn't his daughter. It was an echo, a puppet made of his own grief. The echo of Lily raised a small hand and pointed. Not at him. She was pointing at something over his shoulder. Jake turned slowly. She was pointing at the wall, at a large map of the terminus that showed all the levels and corridors. Her small finger was aimed directly at the very bottom of the map, at a section marked in red, Resonance Chamber. Restricted access, level 7. A jolt went through him. Dawn. The chamber was where the scientist's wife was leading him. Now his own daughter, or the thing wearing her face, was pointing him there too. It was a trap, or an invitation. He couldn't tell which was worse. He turned back and she was gone. vanished into the crowd, Jake was left standing alone, his food forgotten, the noise of the mess hall fading to a distant roar. The thing that looked like his daughter wanted him to go to the heart of the madness. His fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in his gut. But it was mixed with something else. A terrible, desperate hope. What if Thorn was wrong? What if these weren't just echoes? What if they were something more? Trapped souls, pieces of the people they'd lost, trying to communicate. The thought was insane, but in a world where coffee floated and electricity turned to jelly, what was sane anymore? He spent the rest of the shift on autopilot, his mind racing. He cleaned floors and emptied trash bins, but he was really walking through his memories of Lily. Her first word, fur. The smell of her hair after a bath. The weight of her in his arms when she fell asleep. He clung to these details, trying to make them more real than the dull-eyed thing he had seen in the mess hall. That night, sleep was impossible. He lay in his narrow bunk, staring at the metal ceiling. The whispers in the vents were clearer now. He could almost make out words. Names, places, fragments of lives cut short. The terminus was a tomb, and the dead were starting to wake up. He thought of the look on Thorn's face. The scientist was in over his head, trying to patch a hole in the universe with theory and prayer. He couldn't be trusted. General Maddox couldn't be trusted either, a man who would rather watch the bunker collapse than admit defeat. That left Jake, a janitor, a man with nothing left to lose except a memory. A soft blue light began to glow at the foot of his bed. Jake sat up, his heart pounding. The light coalesced, taking shape. It was her again, the echo of Lily. She stood there, bathed in an ethereal glow, her blue dress seeming to shimmer. She wasn't pointing this time. She was holding something out to him. It was a small stuffed bear. Its fur was worn, one of its button eyes missing. It was Barnaby, her favorite toy. The one she'd been holding when he last saw her, just before he left for his shift at the Denver Enclave's power station. The shift that had saved his life and damned him to survive without her. The echo held the bear out to him, her expression unchanging, her eyes still vacant. But then, a single tear, glowing with the same blue light, traced a path down her cheek. A real tear. A flicker of something that looked like sadness in those empty eyes. And a single word, in a voice that was both his daughter's and 1,000 other whispers at once, echoed in his mind. Not his ears. Help. The plea shattered his fear, replacing it with a grim resolve. It didn't matter if it was a ghost or a glitch or a memory with teeth. It was a piece of his daughter, and it was in pain. He would go to the resonance chamber. He would walk into the heart of the broken world. He had to, for Lily. Jake found Dr. Thorne in a state of near collapse in a small monitoring station, just one level above the resonance chamber. The place was a wreck. Screens flickered with static and alien symbols. Wires hung from the ceiling like dead vines. Thorne himself was huddled on the floor, surrounded by data slates, rocking back and forth. The sweet, cloying smell of decay was stronger here, thick in the air. "Thorne," Jake said, his voice firm. The scientist looked up, his eyes wild and unfocused. "It's no good," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "The decay is exponential. The dampening field won't engage. The feedback loop is TWOS. The decay is exponential. The dampening field won't engage. The feedback loop is a sentient. It's defending itself." "The echoes," Jake said, "they're doing it." Thorne let out a choked sob. "Not just any echoes. It's her, Eleanor. She's the gatekeeper. She's woven herself into the chamber's energy matrix. She thinks she's protecting something. A new form of life, a new reality born from our pain. He pointed a trembling finger at a large cracked monitor. Look. On the screen, a flickering image showed the antechamber to the resonance core. The air itself seemed to shimmer, distorting the camera's view. And in the center of the room stood a figure. It was a woman in a lab coat, her form wavering like a heat haze. The echo of Eleanor Thorne. She stood perfectly still, her head tilted as if listening to a silent music. I tried to reason with her, Thorne choked out. I used the comms, I begged her. But she doesn't hear me. She just shows me things. Shows you what? The beginning, Thorne whispered. The day of the event, the truth. He scrambled to his feet and grabbed Jake's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. You have to understand, you think we just broke a law of physics. It's so much worse than that. He pulled Jake over to a terminal that still seemed to be working, his fingers flying across the keypad. He brought up a series of complex diagrams and logs from the event. We knew the risks, Thorne began, his voice gaining a feverish intensity. We knew that altering a universal constant could have unpredictable consequences. So we built in a fail-safe, a conceptual anchor. The idea was to tie the new physics to a single immutable concept. Something so fundamental to the human experience, it would provide a stable framework for the new reality. What concept? Jake asked, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. Thorne didn't answer. He just tapped a key. A single word appeared on the screen, written in stark, block letters. Memory. We anchored the new universe to human memory, Thorne confessed, the words tumbling out of him in a rush. We theorized that shared memory, the collective story of who we are, was the most stable psychic construct we had. We thought it would act as a ballast, keeping the new reality from drifting into pure chaos. He laughed, a raw, broken sound. We were fools. We were so arrogant. We didn't understand what memory is. It's not a neat, orderly library of facts. It's a messy, emotional, contradictory thing. It's grief. It's rage. It's love and loss and regret. We didn't anchor reality to a rock. We anchored it to a storm. The full horrifying truth of their situation finally crashed down on Jake. The echoes weren't a side effect. They were the main effect. The universe wasn't just allowing memories to leak through. The universe was now made of memory. The laws of physics were now governed by feelings. The strength of a wall was now proportional to how much people believed it was strong. The reason gravity was mostly still working was because everyone, on a deep instinctual level, remembered that things fall down. The static, Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. Did we even beat them? Thorne shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. We didn't beat them. We absorbed them. The static erased things. They consumed reality, memory. When we detonated Project Echo, we created a reality based on memory. It was poison to them, but they weren't destroyed. Their nature, the erasure, it mixed with our own grief and loss. It became a part of the new system, Farna. A predator. He pointed back to the screen showing his wife's echo. She's not just an echo of Eleanor, she's a nexus. A concentration of the grief from the 1,000 volunteers, mixed with the essence of the static. She's not just a memory. She's a memory that has learned how to forget, and she's teaching the others. Jake thought of the blank photographs in the dead geologist's room. They weren't just erasing things randomly. They were targeting memories. They were feeding on them. The sweet smell in the air, it was the smell of decaying history. "My daughter," Jake said. "I saw her. She asked for help." Thorn looked at him with pity. "What you saw was a law, Miller. A piece of your own memory, twisted into a shape you'd respond to. They're intelligent. They're learning. They know our weaknesses. They know our love for the dead is our greatest vulnerability. They're using our ghosts to hunt us." The confession left a ringing silence in the small room. Humanity's last stand hadn't just been desperate. It had been a form of cosmic suicide. They had traded a comprehensible monster for an incomprehensible one. They had fled from a tiger, only to lock themselves in a cage with a plague. "So what do we do?" Jake asked, the question feeling impossibly heavy. Thorn turned away from the monitors, his shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked not like a scientist, but like a man who had lost everything. "Here is nothing we can do. We can't fix it. You can't put the lightning back in the bottle. All we can do is wait." "No," Jake said, a fire igniting in the pit of his stomach. It was the same fire he'd felt when the echo of his daughter had cried for help. "Number. If this world is made of memory, then memory is power. If it's made of belief, then we can believe in something else." He walked to the door that led to the lower levels. "I am going down there. I am going to the chamber." "It will kill you," Thorn said, his voice flat. "Eleanor will unmake you. She'll erase every memory you have until you are nothing but a blank slate." "Maybe," Jake said, his hand on the door handle. "But that thing in there used my daughter's face. It used my grief against me. That makes this personal. I am not a scientist. I am not a soldier. I am just a janitor, but I am going to go down there and clean up the mess you made." The descent to level 7 was a journey into the heart of a nightmare. The elevator was dead. So Jake and a reluctant, terrified Thorn had to take the emergency stairs. The stairwell, a narrow spiral of steel mesh, was lit by emergency lights that cast a sickly red glow. With each level they descended, the air grew colder and the sweet, rotten flower smell intensified. The whispers were no longer in the vents. They were in the air itself, a constant, overlapping murmur of forgotten names and half-finished sentences. On level 6, the laws of physics were openly rebelling. A section of the corridor had turned to a substance like black glass, and distorted, screaming faces were trapped just beneath the surface. Further on, a fire suppression sprinkler was spraying a fine, silvery dust that fell upwards, coating the ceiling. Thorn navigated them through the chaos with a morbid familiarity, pointing out the worst of the reality fissures like a tour guide in hell. "The temporal distortions are the worst," he explained, his voice a shaky whisper as they sidestepped a puddle that reflected a sky full of unfamiliar stars. "Don't look at your reflection for too long. You might see yourself die." Jake kept his eyes forward, focusing on the simple, physical act of putting one foot in front of the other. His fear was a cold, hard knot in his stomach, but his resolve was harder. He was a man on a mission. The mission was insane. The goal was unclear, but it was all he had. They reached the final blast door to the antechamber of the resonance chamber. It was sealed shut. A thick layer of frost covered its surface, patterns like ghostly ferns spreading from the edges. "It's frozen from the inside," Thorn said, touching the door and pulling his hand back with a hiss. "She's reinforcing it. The cold is a byproduct of high-level reality negation, the erasure effect. It sucks the energy out of everything." "Can you open it?" Jake asked. Thorn shook his head. The electronic locks are fused. The manual override is probably frozen solid. He looked defeated. It's over. We can't get in. Jake stared at the door. He thought of Lily. He thought of the single glowing tear on the Echo's face. He thought of her voice in his head. Help. This world is made of memory, Jake said, more to himself than to Thorn. Made of belief. He stepped forward and placed his bare hands on the freezing metal of the door. The cold was shocking, a pain that shot up his arms. He ignored it. He closed his eyes. He didn't try to remember science or mechanics. He remembered Lily. He remembered teaching her how to open a stubborn jam jar. You just have to believe you are stronger than the jar, sweetie, he had told her. He remembered her face when she finally twisted the lid open, the look of pure, triumphant pride. He focused on that feeling, the simple, powerful belief of a father showing his daughter how to open something. He didn't push. He just believed the door would open. He poured all his love for his daughter, all his grief for her loss, into that one simple thought. The door should be open. A low groan echoed through the corridor. The frost on the door began to crack. Thorn stared, his mouth agape. The massive steel wheel of the manual lock began to turn, slowly scraping against the ice. It wasn't Jake's strength moving it. It was his will, his memory. In a world governed by emotion, a father's love was a force of nature. With a final, deafening screech of metal on metal, the lock disengaged. The blast door swung inward a few inches, releasing a wave of intensely cold air. My God, Thorn breathed. How did you do that? I remembered, Jake said simply. He pushed the heavy door open. The antechamber was a landscape of frozen madness. The walls, floor, and ceiling were coated in a thick crystalline ice that glowed with a faint blue light. In the center of the room stood the wavering, translucent form of Eleanor Thorn. She turned to face them as they entered. Her face was calm, serene, but her eyes held a chilling emptiness. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Eleanor Thorn whispered, taking a step forward. Please stop this. The echo of his wife didn't speak. She raised a hand. From the icy floor, another shape began to rise. It was an echo, but different. It was malformed, twisted. A security guard Jake recognized, a man named Corporal Davis, who had died during a food riot 2 years ago. But his face was stretched into a permanent silent scream, and his limbs were bent at impossible angles. The thing that was once Davis lurched towards them. Don't fight it with anger, Thorn yelled at Jake. That's what they feed on. Strong, violent emotions. But Jake wasn't angry, he was sad. He looked at the shambling horror, and he didn't see a monster. He saw a man who had died in fear and pain. He remembered seeing Davis in the mess hall, showing off pictures of his family from before the war. As the creature lunged, Jake held up a hand. He didn't brace for impact. He focused on a single clear memory of Davis, laughing, happy. He pushed that memory out, a silent offering. Rest, he thought. It's over. You can rest now. The echo of Corporal Davis stopped, inches from Jake. The screaming torment on its face softened. The twisted limbs straightened. For a fleeting second, it looked like the man Jake remembered. It gave a slight, grateful nod, then dissolved into a shower of glowing blue dust that settled onto the icy floor. Eleanor Thorne's echo tilted her head. An expression that might have been surprise flickered across her serene face. The enemy wasn't just made of grief and rage. It was made of all memory. And it had never encountered a weapon like pity before. It had never faced an opponent who fought with compassion. But there were other shapes rising from the floor now, dozens of them. The echoes of all the fear and pain and loss that had been poured into this room. They were the true guardians of the chamber. The bunker's sorrow given form and a terrible, hungry purpose. The new enemy wasn't the echoes. It was humanity's own history, and it was rising up to devour the present. The antechamber became a gallery of ghosts. Figures shimmered into existence from the glowing ice, each one a monument to some tragedy that Terminus had endured. A scientist who had died in a lab explosion, his form flickering like a faulty hologram. A young couple who had succumbed to the wasting sickness, holding hands, their faces gaunt and hollow. A soldier from the early days of the static war, his uniform tattered, his eyes wide with a terror that had outlived his body. They converged on Jake and Thorn, a silent, shuffling army of sorrow. They didn't move with malice, but with a kind of desperate, gravitational pull, as if their emptiness needed to be filled by the warmth and life of the two men. The cold in the room intensified, and the air crackled with the energy of their collective despair. "Don't let them touch you," Thorn shouted, his voice thin and reedy. "They'll drain you, erase you a piece at a time." He fumbled inside his coat and pulled out a small device, a metal cylinder that hummed with a low energy. A localized reality anchor. It might hold them back. He activated it. A faint, golden bubble of light, no bigger than a car, flickered into existence around them. The closest echoes recoiled from it, hissing like water on a hot skillet. But the bubble was unstable, wavering under the immense pressure of the concentrated grief. "It won't last long," Thorn yelled over the rising chorus of whispers. "The sheer density of the mnemonic field is overwhelming." Jake ignored the device. He looked past the shuffling crowd of ghosts to the serene, powerful figure of Eleanor Thorn. She was the conductor of this orchestra of pain. The others were just instruments. But to get to her, they had to get through them. He couldn't fight them all. He couldn't possibly have a memory for every forgotten soul in this room. His compassion was a powerful weapon, but he was just one man. He looked at the faces in the crowd, lost, afraid. Alone, they weren't monsters, they were just trapped. And then he saw her. Near the back of the crowd, almost hidden behind the larger, more imposing figures, was the echo of Lily. She looked small and frail amidst the others. She wasn't shuffling forward. She was just standing there watching him, her doll-like eyes holding that same flicker of sadness he had seen before. She held the ghostly image of her teddy bear Barnaby, clutched to her chest. He had to get to her. "Thorn, can you get us to that door?" Jake pointed to the far side of the room, to the sealed entrance of the resonance chamber itself. "The core?" "Are you insane?" the scientist shrieked. "That's the source, the heart of the fracture. The reality in there isn't just bent, it's shattered into a billion pieces. It will tear you apart atom by atom." "It's where she is," Jake said, his eyes locked on the small figure of his daughter. "It's where this ends, one way or another." Thorn looked from Jake's determined face to the horde of ghosts pressing in on their flickering shield of light. He saw the cracks forming in the golden bubble. He saw the inevitable. "All right," he said, a strange calm settling over him. "All right, I'll get you to the door, but the energy required to get it open, it will drain the anchor completely. You'll be on your own." "I've been on my own for a long time," Jake said. Follow me! Stay inside the field! Thorn yelled. He began to push his way through the crowd, the golden bubble acting like a snowplow, shoving the spectral forms aside. The echoes clawed at the light, their silent mouths open in anguish. It was like wading through a sea of drowning souls. Jake kept his focus on Lily. He saw her turn and slip through the solid-looking door to the resonance chamber, as if it wasn't there. She was leading him. She wanted him to follow. The plea for help had been real. They reached the core's entrance. It was a perfect circle of polished black metal, colder than the rest of the room, seeming to drink the light. There was no handle, no lock. "This is it," Thorn said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "I am going to focus the anchor's entire remaining energy into a resonance cascade, to force it open. When it opens, the field will collapse. You'll have maybe 5 seconds before they're on you. Go, Miller. Whatever you are going to do, do it." "What about you?" Jake asked. Thorn smiled, a sad, tired smile. He looked past Jake at the shimmering figure of his wife. "I am going to have a word with the management," he said softly. "I started this. It's time I took some responsibility." Before Jake could protest, Thorn slammed his device against the center of the black door. The golden bubble around them flared with an incandescent brightness, then collapsed inward, focusing into a single, blinding point of light on the door's surface. A deafening high-frequency tone screamed through the chamber. The echoes reeled back, momentarily stunned by the blast of pure, ordered reality. The black door dilated like the iris of an eye, opening into a swirling vortex of color and light. "Go!" Thorn screamed. He then turned his back on the door and walked calmly toward the echo of his wife, his arms open wide. "Eleanor," Jake heard him say, "I am sorry." Jake didn't wait to see what happened. He took a deep breath and plunged through the doorway into the heart of the machine that had broken the world. The inside of the resonance chamber was not a room. It was an idea. Jake found himself floating in a space, with no walls, no floor, no ceiling. He was adrift in an infinite sea of swirling nebulae. But the nebulae were made of images and sounds. He saw a child's birthday party flash past, laughter echoing, only to be swallowed by the silent, slow-motion image of a collapsing skyscraper. He heard a love song intertwined with a mother's sob. He felt the warmth of a summer day on his skin, immediately replaced by the biting cold of a nuclear winter. This was it, the raw, unfiltered core of the new reality, a storm of pure memory. It was overwhelming. His own memories began to bleed out of him, pulled away by the psychic tide. He saw his first kiss, his wedding day, the day Lily was born. They were beautiful and painful, and they were being stripped from him, becoming part of the chaotic whole. He was dissolving, forgetting who he was. Then a single clear image cut through the chaos. A little girl in a blue dress holding a teddy bear. Lily. She stood on a small, stable island of reality in the middle of the storm. It was a perfect reconstruction of her bedroom in their old Denver apartment. The yellow wallpaper with the dancing cartoon rabbits. The bookshelf filled with her favorite stories. The small wooden chair where he used to sit and read to her. She was waiting for him. Jake pushed through the storm of memories, his will focused on that single point of light. It was like swimming upstream against a hurricane, but the thought of her gave him strength. He pulled his own memories back, wrapping them around himself like armor. He finally stumbled out of the chaos and onto the solid floor of the phantom bedroom. "Lily?" he said, his voice raw. The echo turned to him, Her eyes were no longer empty. They were filled with a profound, ancient sadness. And when she spoke, it was not just her voice. It was a chorus of 1,000 voices, the voices of all the volunteers who had powered this machine, speaking as one. "We are the anchor," the chorus said, the sound echoing inside Jake's mind. "We were meant to be the foundation, but the foundation cracked." "You asked for help," Jake said, taking a step closer. "The wound is too deep," the Lily chorus replied. The room around them flickered, and for a second, Jake saw the faces of the other volunteers superimposed over the cartoon rabbits on the wall. Scared, determined faces. The sorrow was too great. It attracted the nothing, the static. It is not a creature. It is an absence, a hunger for memory. It has nested in our grief. "Your wife," Jake said, thinking of Thorn, Eleanor. "She's feeding it." "She is the heart of the sorrow," the voice said. "Her grief for this broken world is the strongest. The nothing uses her to guard the wound, to keep it open. It promises her a new creation, a world of quiet, painless emptiness, a world with no bad memories, a world with no memories at all." Jake finally understood. The echoes weren't a single entity. They were fractured. There were those like Eleanor, consumed by the static's promise of oblivion, seeking to erase everything. And there were those like Lily, the core of the original anchor, fighting to hold reality together, drowning in a sea of pain. "How do I help you?" Jake asked. "How do we fix this?" The image of Lily's room flickered more violently. The storm of chaotic memory was pressing in. "You cannot fix the break," the chorus whispered, the voice growing weaker. "But you can seal the wound. It requires a sacrifice. A powerful, anchoring memory. A memory of pure, untainted love to cauterize the infection of the nothing." The echo of Lily held out the ghostly teddy bear. "Our story has been a shield, the memory of your love for this child. It is strong. It is one of the pillars holding this last piece of the world together. But it is also tainted with grief, with loss, with regret. The nothing feeds on that part of it. To seal the wound, the memory must be complete." Jake knew what she was asking. What they were all asking. He had to let her go. Not just accept that she was gone. He had to let go of the memory itself. He had to give his love for her, the most precious thing he had, to the broken heart of the universe. To cauterize the wound, he had to burn away the best part of himself. Tears streamed down Jake's face. To save the world, he had to lose his daughter a second time. And this time, it would be forever. He would forget her face, her laugh, her name. "I can't," he choked out. The Lily echo reached out and put a small, cool hand on his cheek. "She loved you, Daddy," it said. And this time, the voice was only Lily's, clear and pure. "She wouldn't want you to be sad forever." He looked into the echo's eyes and saw, not a ghost, but the essence of his daughter's love for him. It was the last, purest part of her. And it was giving him permission. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I love you, Lily," he whispered. He reached out and took the ghostly bear. The moment his fingers closed around it, the memory hit him. Not just a memory, but the feeling, the reality of it. The pure, unconditional love of a father for his child. It was the most powerful force he had ever known. He held it in his mind, and then, with a final, ragged cry of agony and love, he let it go. He offered it to the storm. A wave of pure white light erupted from him. A love so powerful it was like a sun being born in the heart of chaos. It washed over everything, silencing the screaming memories, pushing back the darkness. It was a light that didn't destroy, it healed. The bedroom dissolved. The chorus of voices faded. The echo of Lily looked at him one last time, and for the first time she truly smiled, a real happy smile. Then she faded into the light, her last gift to him, the peace of her own release. Jake was left floating in a silent, peaceful darkness. He felt empty, hollowed out. He tried to remember why he was there, what he had just done. He knew it was important. He knew it was about a little girl. But the name, the face, they were gone. There was just a dull ache in his chest, a phantom limb of the heart. He had saved the world, and the price had been his soul. The silence was the first thing Jake noticed when he woke up. Not the deep, profound silence that had followed the event, which had felt like the universe holding its breath. This was a normal silence. The quiet hum of machinery doing what it was supposed to do. The distant, steady rush of air through clean vents. The whispers were gone. He was lying on a cot in the infirmary. The lights overhead were a steady, clean white. A nurse was checking a monitor beside his bed. She smiled at him, a genuine, tired smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller," she said. "You gave us quite a scare. Found you unconscious outside the resonance chamber. General Maddox wants to give you a medal." Jake sat up. He felt stable. The world felt stable. He looked at a glass of water on the bedside table. It was just a glass of water. It wasn't threatening to float or turn into sand. He felt the familiar pull of gravity holding him to the cot. It felt like an old friend. "What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Nobody knows for sure," the nurse said, shrugging. "About 12 hours ago, everything just settled. The power came back on in the lower levels. The reality fluctuations just stopped." Dr. Thorne. "They found him in the antechamber. He's gone." She paused, her expression sad. "They said he was holding a picture of his wife. He just looked peaceful. The official report is a massive energy discharge from the chamber stabilized the system. They're calling it the Thorne correction. He's a hero." Jake nodded slowly. Thorne had found his own way to seal a wound. He had joined his wife, balancing the scales of his own creation. A scientist to the very end. He swung his legs over the side of the cot. He felt a deep, aching emptiness inside him. A hole where something vital used to be. He knew he had done something important in that chamber. He had a vague, dreamlike impression of light and a feeling of immense loss. A sacrifice. But the details were gone, erased by the very act of making them. He was discharged a few hours later. The terminus was a different place. The paranoia was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary relief. People were talking to each other again. There were even a few smiles. They had survived the victory. Jake went back to his job. He got his cart, his mop, his bucket. He went to work cleaning the corridors. It was just work now. No rust spots changing color, no strange whispers. The world was blessedly, beautifully boring. He was mopping the floor in corridor Gamma -7 when he saw General Maddox. The general was walking with his aides, talking loudly about reinforcing the bunker's perimeter, even though there was nothing left to reinforce it against. As Maddox passed, he noticed Jake. He stopped. "Miller," he said, his voice booming. "The man of the hour. The docs told me you were right there at the end. Courageous. Foolish, but courageous. We're all in your debt." Jake just nodded. Just doing my job, sir. Maddox clapped him on the shoulder. That's the spirit. Carry on. And he walked away, already wrapped up in his new narrative of military precision and heroic sacrifice. Jake was left alone in the corridor. He looked down at the floor. He was near the spot where the blue rust stain had been. The floor was clean now, perfectly, immaculately clean. He felt a pang of something. Sadness. He wasn't sure. It was a colorless emotion, a feeling without a name. He finished his shift and went to the mess hall. He got a tray of nutrient paste and a cup of coffee. He sat at an empty table. He set the cup down. It stayed put. It was just a cup of coffee on a table. He stared at it for a long time, waiting for it to do something impossible. It never did. The laws of physics had been rewritten, and then, it seemed, they had been messily patched. Humanity's last stand had been so desperate it had broken reality, and the janitor had cleaned it up. He had scrubbed the chaos away, and the price had been the very memories that made him who he was. He was just Jake Miller now, a man with a hole in his heart he couldn't name, a man who had saved the world from the ghosts of its past by sacrificing his own. He picked up the coffee cup. The recycled sludge tasted bitter. He drank it anyway. In the new, quiet world, it was the only thing that had any taste at all. Humanity had survived. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a defeat. It was just Tau the Tuesday. And there was still floors to be cleaned. It was enough. It had to be.